On a crisp evening, when the air was filled with a hint of winter's chill and the sky was painted with warm, golden hues of a setting sun, the world seemed to move in slow motion. The kind of evening where everything feels just a bit more serene, a bit more alive. And as the streets grew quieter and the lights of the neighborhood houses flickered on, there was a dog. A stray, wandering down the road, his paws dragging with weariness, his coat ragged and patched. His eyes, those eyes told a story of longing, of hunger, and an ache too deep for words. This wasn't just any stray. This was Kaler Cottrell, a dog with a past full of heartache and a future uncertain. He wasn't used to kindness, but that was about to change. Kaler had learned to survive on his own. He didn't remember what it felt like to be part of a family. He didn't remember the feeling of warmth from a bed or the security of knowing someone would care for him. All he knew was the streets, where survival meant running, hiding, and never staying in one place for too long. Tonight, as he wandered with heavy steps, he didn't even expect to find food, let alone something that might change his life forever. He wasn't waiting for a miracle. After all, dogs like him didn't get miracles. But that evening, something different happened. As Kyler padded slowly down the street, his nose twitching at the scent of food from nearby homes, he passed a house on the corner that caught his attention. It wasn't anything extraordinary. The house was modest, nestled between others just like it, but there was something about it, the way the windows seemed to glow with warmth and life. Maybe it was the faint sound of laughter drifting through the air, or the way the porch light bathed the front yard in a soft, welcoming glow. But whatever it was, Kaler felt something stir within him. For the first time in a long while, he stopped. Mahogany Rupert, a woman with a soft, caring heart, was sitting by the window that evening, enjoying the last bits of daylight before night took over. As she looked out, her eyes caught a glimpse of something moving in the yard next door. A figure, small, scruffy, and alone. At first, she wasn't sure what it was, but as she squinted, her heart sank. It was a dog, a poor, lonely creature with matted fur and eyes that told 1,000 stories of abandonment. Kaler didn't look up. He simply wandered past, unaware that someone had noticed him. Mahogany couldn't help but feel a pull, a deep, unspoken empathy for this dog, who seemed to have nothing left in the world but his survival instincts. Without thinking, she stood up from her chair, walked into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. There it was, the last bit of leftover turkey from dinner, still wrapped in foil. She hesitated for only a moment, then grabbed the food and stepped outside. Kaler, hearing the sound of the door creaking open, turned his head slightly. His tired eyes met hers, and in that brief, silent exchange, something passed between them. He didn't move, unsure of what to do next. Was this a trap? A trick? But Mahogany held out the food, not with hesitation or fear, but with an open hand, offering the kindness she had always known. "Here, buddy," she called softly. "You look hungry." Kaler's stomach growled loudly in response, but still, he didn't move. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper. An unfamiliar sensation, one he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He had been on the streets so long, he had forgotten what it was like to trust anyone. He had learned to fend for himself, to scavenge and survive, but this was different. This was a gift. With a tentative step, Kyler inched closer. His nose twitched as the scent of turkey filled the air. His body, once stiff with caution, relaxed slightly. As his paws moved closer to Mahogany's outstretched hand, he hesitated one last time. And then, without another thought, he took the food, devouring it quickly, desperately, as though it was the first real meal he had ever had. Mahogany watched in silence, her heart swelling with compassion as she saw how the dog ate, not just out of hunger, but with the kind of relief that only comes when you've been starved for so much more than food. He wasn't just feeding his body, he was feeding his soul. And in that moment, Mahogany knew. This wasn't just about food. It was about offering kindness in a world that so often forgets what it means to give. When Kyler had finished, he stepped back, his eyes looking up at Mahogany, with something almost human in them, gratitude. He didn't know what to do next, but it was clear. He had found someone who saw him. Mahogany smiled gently and crouched down, her eyes meeting his with an unspoken promise. "You're safe here, buddy. You don't have to be alone anymore." It was a simple promise, but it carried weight beyond words. Kaylor had no idea what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. And that was the first step toward healing, a journey that would change both their lives forever. As the evening unfolded, the air grew cooler, but the warmth between Kaylor and Mahogany lingered. Kaylor, his belly now full and his heart lighter than it had been in years, stayed where he was. He didn't know why he didn't run. Maybe it was the soft glow of the porch light, the gentle rhythm of Mahogany's voice, or perhaps it was the rare feeling of safety that enveloped him. For once, he didn't have to hide. Didn't have to worry about where his next meal would come from or whether he'd be chased off by another stranger. Mahogany stood up slowly, her knees creaking just slightly, and as she did, Kaylor's eyes followed her movements. She walked toward the door, and for a split second, he thought she was going to go inside, that this brief moment of kindness would be over, just like the many others he had experienced in his life. But she didn't go inside. Instead, she turned back to him, her eyes soft but steady. "Come on, Kaylor," she said gently, as if she had known him for years. Her voice held no force, no expectation, just a simple invitation. "You can stay here for the night. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." Her words carried an unspoken promise, one that tugged at Kaylor's heart in a way he wasn't prepared for. He had never been offered a safe place to sleep. He had always found comfort in alleyways, in abandoned corners where no one could reach him. But something about Mahogany's presence, her easy way with him, made him feel like he mattered. Like he wasn't just a stray dog passing through the world, but someone worthy of a moment of peace. Kaylor didn't understand everything that was happening, but he could feel the shift in his heart. And so, with a tentative step, he followed her inside. The house was simple but inviting, filled with soft colors and the faint scent of fresh linens and the warmth of a crackling fire in the living room. Mahogany led him to a cozy corner of the room, near a soft rug and a large armchair. The space was welcoming in a way Kaylor had never experienced. There were no harsh floors, no cold winds biting at his skin. There was only warmth and comfort, an oasis for a weary soul like his. She crouched down and smiled as Kaylor gingerly stepped onto the rug, his body still cautious but curious. "This is your space now," Mahogany said, her voice a soothing balm to the raw edges of his spirit. No more wandering, no more searching for scraps. Kaylor's tail wagged slowly at first, then with more confidence. He laid down, tucking his head onto the rug, eyes drifting closed. For the first time in what felt like forever, Kaylor slept deeply. No nightmares, no fear, just the sound of Mahogany's gentle voice as she hummed softly from the kitchen, preparing tea. The night passed peacefully, but Mahogany wasn't ready to let go of this newfound bond so easily. She had always been an animal lover, but there was something about Kaylor's quiet vulnerability that touched her deeply. She knew that it wasn't just him who had changed that night. He had brought something into her life, a lesson in patience, in kindness, and in the power of trust. But more than anything, Kaylor had reminded her that sometimes offering a little bit of grace could change everything. The next morning, Mahogany awoke to find Kaylor still lying by the rug, his eyes slightly open as if waiting for her to appear. She smiled softly, her heart swelling. He had found comfort here, and in a way, she had too. There was something about the simple act of offering a meal, a safe place to rest, that connected them in ways words could never explain. But this was only the beginning. Kaylor's journey toward healing had just started, and Mahogany's was about to take an unexpected turn as well. She approached Kaylor slowly, crouching down so that they were eye to eye. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. His ears perked up, and he gave a soft woof, as if answering her. And in that moment, Mahogany knew. They were going to walk this path together, step by step. As she reached out her hand, Kaylor hesitated for just a moment, then nudged his head against her palm, seeking the affection he had long been denied. Mahogany stroked his fur gently, feeling the bond between them solidifying with each touch. She had no idea where this journey would take them, but she didn't need to know. All she knew was that they were no longer strangers. They were family, and together, they would build something new. In the weeks that followed, Kaylor began to show sides of himself Mahogany hadn't seen before. He had once been wary of anyone getting too close, but now he started to follow her around the house, napping beside her, sitting quietly at her feet while she worked on small projects. He even started wagging his tail when she returned from errands, as though he were greeting a long-lost friend. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Kyler had found a new rhythm in his life, one filled with the comfort of knowing that someone cared. And Mahogany had found a companion, a loyal friend whose love and joy were nothing short of transformative. But as much as Kyler was healing, Mahogany knew that their time together would soon be tested. She could feel the pull of something bigger, a deep sense of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just caring for Kyler, she was learning from him. He had brought joy into her life in the most unexpected way, and now she had to face the reality of what that meant for their future. The bond between Kyler and Mahogany was a reminder of how the smallest acts of kindness could create the deepest connections. And as they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset, Mahogany knew that this wasn't just about saving Kyler. It was about understanding what it truly meant to love without condition, to offer kindness even when it wasn't asked for, and to embrace the quiet joy that comes from being seen, truly seen, for the first time. As the days passed, Kyler's presence began to fill the house. He became a symbol of something greater, something Mahogany had longed for in her own life, a reminder that there was always room for more love, more connection, and more heart. As the days passed, Kyler and Mahogany's connection only deepened. It was subtle at first, the small, quiet moments that passed between them. Kyler's tail would wag in a steady rhythm whenever Mahogany spoke to him, as though he were learning the language of love in ways he never had before. In the mornings, he would wait by the door, eager for his daily walk, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. But it wasn't just the walks that excited him. It was the routine, the certainty of having someone there who cared, someone who would never leave him behind. Mahogany, too, had changed. She noticed it most during the quiet moments when she was alone. Before Kyler, her house had felt empty, even when she was surrounded by people. She had always been good at keeping busy, working long hours and filling her time with tasks, but when the workday ended, there was a heaviness in the air, a sense of solitude that she hadn't quite known how to fill. But now, when she returned home, Kyler's excited barks and the sound of his paws patting across the floor greeted her with warmth. She realized that this bond they were forming was more than just about giving him a home. It was about filling her own life with something real and unwavering. One evening, as Mahogany was sitting in the living room, curled up with a book, Kyler climbed up onto the couch beside her. He nudged her arm gently with his nose, a quiet request for attention. She looked down at him, and without thinking, she reached out to scratch behind his ears. It was a small, simple gesture, but it felt like a quiet conversation, one where they didn't need words. Kyler sighed in contentment, leaning into her touch, and Mahogany smiled softly, her heart full. There was something healing about these little moments, something that transcended all the noise of the world outside. Kyler had been through so much. His days of scavenging for scraps, living in the shadows, were behind him. But his scars, both physical and emotional, were still present. Sometimes when Mahogany would reach down to pet him, Kyler would flinch, his body tensing up. It was a reflex, one born from years of being beaten down and abandoned. But over time, Mahogany learned to recognize these moments and respond with even more patience, more understanding. She didn't rush him, didn't force him to heal. Instead, she gave him space, knowing that his trust would come back in small, delicate steps. And with every step, Kyler grew stronger. On one particularly warm afternoon, Mahogany decided to take Kyler to the park. She had noticed how much he loved running through the grass, chasing after the leaves that fluttered in the wind. She hoped the open space would help him feel free, help him forget about the chains of his past. She grabbed his leash, and he bounced toward the door, his excitement palpable. When they arrived at the park, Mahogany unclipped the leash, allowing Kyler to roam freely for the first time since he'd come home. He took off in an instant, running with joy and abandon, his body stretching in wide, graceful arcs. It was as though he were rediscovering his freedom all over again, and Mahogany couldn't help but smile at the sight. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a moment that spoke louder than words could ever express. Kyler raced around the park, his ears flopping, his eyes shining with pure happiness. He leapt after the birds, his tail trailing behind him like a flag in the wind. Mahogany watched him, her heart swelling with pride. She had been part of his transformation, part of this beautiful journey. But she knew that it wasn't just her who had changed him. It was the simple, steady love that had flowed between them. It was the trust that they had built together, brick by brick. Kyler was no longer the wary, defensive dog that had first stumbled onto her doorstep. He was a creature of joy, of light, and of love. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Mahogany called out to Kyler. His head snapped around, and in a moment of perfect synchrony, he bounded toward her, sliding to a stop at her feet. She laughed, ruffling his fur. "I think you've had enough for today, haven't you?" she said, her voice gentle. Kyler looked up at her with eyes full of love and trust, as if to say, "Yes, this is enough." On the way back to the car, Mahogany couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. She had never expected this stray dog to become such an integral part of her life. Kyler had entered her world as a broken, mistrustful animal, and now he was a companion, one who made her feel grounded and loved. And in turn, Mahogany had become his safe place, his constant, the one who would never let him down. As they arrived home, Kyler walked calmly beside her, his steps measured and sure. He no longer hesitated at the door, no longer recoiled from sudden movements. Mahogany knew, without a doubt, that this was the beginning of something beautiful, something that neither of them could have predicted. Later that night, as they settled in for bed, Kyler curled up beside her, his body warm and content against hers. The soft rhythm of his breathing filled the room, and Mahogany closed her eyes, letting out a contented sigh. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole, complete. And in the quiet of the night, she realized that this journey of love, of transformation, had just begun. They were building something together, something far beyond what either of them could have imagined when they first met. Kyler had come into her life as a stray, an animal in need of a second chance. But in truth, they had both given each other a second chance. A chance at healing, a chance at love, and a chance at belonging. In that moment, Mahogany knew that they had found something rare, something precious. The question lingered in her mind. What would have happened if she hadn't opened that door to Kyler? What if she had turned away, just like so many others had before? Would Kyler have continued to wander, or would he have found another path? Would Mahogany have found the courage to let someone or something love her so completely? As Kyler settled deeper into his spot, his body relaxed and calm, Mahogany felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever the answer to those questions was, she didn't need to know. What mattered was that they had found each other, and in that, they had found a family. The next morning, Mahogany woke up to a sound that made her heart swell with joy, a soft, rhythmic snoring beside her. Kyler was sprawled out at the foot of the bed, his body relaxed and content, one paw dangling over the edge. She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It had been days since Kyler had come into her life, and already, she couldn't imagine her mornings without him. She carefully slid out of bed, making sure not to disturb him, and headed to the kitchen. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, she glanced out the window at the garden, watching the morning light dance through the leaves. It struck her that Kyler had done more than just fill her house with noise and love. He had filled her world with meaning. Mahogany knew that adopting Kyler had been a leap of faith. She had been prepared to give him a second chance. But what she hadn't anticipated was the profound impact he would have on her. As she watched him, his head resting peacefully, she felt a surge of gratitude. Kyler had shown her that love could heal in unexpected ways, that joy could be found in the simplest of moments. When Kyler finally stirred, his eyes fluttered open, and he lifted his head, his gaze finding Mahogany. A bright smile lit her face. "Hey buddy," she said softly, walking over to his side. Kyler's tail began to wag in a steady rhythm, and his eyes sparkled with recognition. Mahogany reached down to scratch his ears, and he leaned into her touch, his body trembling with happiness. In that instant, Mahogany felt an inexplicable joy wash over her. It wasn't just the act of petting him. It was the profound connection she felt. The knowledge that this stray dog had chosen her, had found his way into her life, and had chosen to stay. She realized that Kaler wasn't just finding a home, he was creating one. He had reminded her of the importance of patience, of seeing the beauty in scars, and of trusting that love could mend the deepest wounds. As she led Kaler to the kitchen, she noticed how much he had settled into his new routine. He moved with a confidence that had been absent before, and his posture, though still tinged with a certain wariness, had softened. He followed her into the room with a gentle eagerness, and Mahogany realized that he had already begun to change, just as she had. Throughout the day, Mahogany found herself observing Kaler in new ways. She watched as he explored the living room, pausing to sniff at a new spot, or as he flopped onto the couch, his eyes fixed on the window, his ears twitching as he listened to the sounds of the street outside. She noticed the subtle way he was beginning to let go of his old fears. In moments, he would approach her more readily, his movements less guarded, his eyes filled with curiosity rather than fear. It was clear that Kaler was not simply adjusting to a new home, he was redefining himself. Mahogany understood that when he had first entered her life, Kaler had been haunted by the echoes of a past that had treated him harshly. He had carried that weight with him, and his body had been tense, his eyes wary. But as he began to trust, as he felt the freedom to express himself without fear, she saw him begin to bloom. One afternoon, Mahogany decided to take Kaler on a long walk in the park. She had learned that he loved the wide-open space and the freedom it brought, and she had come to cherish the way Kaler's spirit seemed to lift, as if the air itself were brimming with possibility. This time, as she clipped on his leash, she watched as Kaler turned, his eyes bright with anticipation. When she opened the door, he bolted out, his paws hitting the pavement with a joyful rhythm. Mahogany couldn't help but laugh out loud, feeling a surge of happiness at the sight of him moving so freely. As they walked, Mahogany could feel the tension leave Kaler's body, his tail waving high, his ears perked, and his eyes fixed on the world ahead. For Mahogany, it was as though Kaler had found a part of himself in the park, a part that had been hidden for a long time. She knew that every time he bounded after a butterfly or pranced through the grass, he was rediscovering his essence, shedding the shackles of a past that had held him back. They passed other people walking their dogs, and Kaler would pause to watch them with a mixture of curiosity and longing. It was clear that he still longed for connection, and Mahogany felt a pang in her chest. But she knew that Kaler was learning, slowly but surely, that she was someone he could depend on, that his life had value beyond survival. When they returned home, Mahogany sat down on the couch, and Kaler immediately jumped up beside her, his body pressing gently against her side. She felt his warmth radiate through her, and in that moment, she realized that Kaler had come to fill a void she hadn't even been aware of. He had brought a balance to her life, a sense of purpose, and the knowledge that she could be a source of safety and love for another being. In the quiet of the afternoon, Mahogany began to contemplate all that Kaler had taught her. He had shown her that wounds could heal, that scars could hold stories, and that love could change everything. As she looked down at Kaler, she felt her eyes fill with tears, the kind that are born of pure gratitude. She whispered softly, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Kaler turned his head, his eyes meeting hers, and in that gaze, Mahogany could see that he felt the same. For Kaler, Mahogany wasn't just a person. She was a lifeline, a beacon, a refuge. And for Mahogany, Kaler had become a reminder that sometimes the greatest healings come from the least expected places. As the days turned into weeks, Mahogany and Kaler's bond deepened in ways Mahogany had never imagined. Every walk they took, every quiet evening spent in each other's company, felt like a step closer to something profound, something unspoken but deeply felt. There was a subtle change in Kaler. Gone were the days when he would flinch at sudden movements or shrink away from unfamiliar sounds. He had found his comfort zone, and it was nestled right next to Mahogany, who had proven herself to be a constant, unwavering presence in his life. The transformation wasn't just in Kaler. Mahogany had also begun to understand herself more deeply through the simple act of loving Kyler. She saw in him the reflection of her own vulnerability, her own need for safety and connection. Kyler had taught her patience, reminding her that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. He had also shown her that kindness, no matter how small, ripples out and changes the course of someone's life. And for Mahogany, it was no longer just about providing Kyler with a safe place to live. It was about showing him the world through a lens of possibility, of new beginnings. One afternoon, Mahogany decided to take Kyler to the beach. She'd heard how much he loved the outdoors, how he'd run in the park with wild abandon, and she thought the wide expanse of sand and surf would be the perfect place to let Kyler truly run free. She packed a small bag with snacks, grabbed a blanket, and they made their way to the shore. As soon as Kyler felt the sand beneath his paws, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of this new terrain. But Mahogany gave him a gentle nudge, and with that encouragement, Kyler broke into a joyous sprint. His body moved with such freedom, his legs stretching out like a dancer's, and Mahogany couldn't help but laugh at the sheer joy on his face. She marveled at the way the ocean's breeze tousled his fur and how he raced toward the waves, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of discovery. Mahogany spread out the blanket and sat down, watching Kyler play, his energy boundless. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Kyler was no longer the timid, cautious dog who had wandered the streets, unsure of where he belonged. He was a creature of pure joy, embracing life with a freedom that made Mahogany's heart swell. He had found his place in the world, and that place, she realized, was right beside her. Later that day, as the sun began to set and the colors of the sky shifted from vibrant oranges and pinks to soft purples and blues, Mahogany sat beside Kyler, his head resting on her lap. The sounds of the waves crashing gently on the shore filled the air, and Mahogany stroked Kyler's fur, lost in the peacefulness of the moment. The bond between them had only grown stronger, and Mahogany knew in her heart that this was a love that would last a lifetime. Kyler had come into her life not just as a pet, but as a partner, a companion who would walk with her through the highs and lows, sharing in every adventure and offering comfort during the difficult moments. As the evening drew to a close, Mahogany stood up, gathering their things and preparing to leave. She glanced at Kyler, who was looking up at her with those big, soulful eyes, and smiled. She knew that they were a team now, a pair that couldn't be broken. They were each other's family, and that was all that mattered. Driving home that night, Mahogany reflected on the journey they had shared. She thought about how different things had been when she first met Kyler, the uncertainty, the fear, the hesitation. But now, as she glanced in the rearview mirror at Kyler's peaceful face, she could see the growth. She could see the trust they had built, the bond they had created, and it filled her with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As they arrived home, Mahogany opened the door to their apartment, and Kyler immediately trotted in, tail wagging, eager to settle into his favorite spot on the couch. Mahogany followed him inside, feeling a deep sense of contentment. There was a peace in their home now, a quiet joy that came from knowing they had each other. In the quiet moments that followed, Mahogany realized that she had found more than just a dog. She had found a friend, a confidant, and a reminder that love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about the small moments, the ones shared in the comfort of silence, the quiet companionship that grows with time. And in that realization, Mahogany felt her heart swell with love for Kyler, a love that had blossomed from a simple act of kindness. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Mahogany and Kyler's connection grew even deeper. It was as though they were two puzzle pieces finally locking into place. Kyler had blossomed from the skittish, uncertain stray dog Mahogany had first met into a confident and joyous companion. Each day spent together felt like a new chapter of their shared story, one where laughter and joy replaced the fear and hesitation that once defined Kyler's existence. It wasn't just Kyler who had changed. Mahogany found herself becoming a better version of herself too. She was learning to be present, to let go of her own worries and fears, and to fully embrace the unconditional love Kyler offered her. In a way, Kyler had reminded her of the beauty of simplicity, the joy that comes from living in the moment, from sharing experiences with someone who didn't need anything from her except her love. One evening, Mahogany decided to surprise Kyler with something special. She had noticed that he loved going on long walks, especially through the park, where the trees stood tall like sentinels watching over the world. She thought it would be the perfect place to take him for a little adventure. As they walked through the park that evening, Mahogany felt a sense of calm wash over her. The soft glow of the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground as the two of them strolled side by side. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, the perfect backdrop for the quiet companionship that had grown between them. Kyler was more confident than ever, his head held high as he trotted alongside Mahogany, sniffing at the ground, his ears perked as he listened to the sounds of the world around him. It was a sight to behold, this once timid dog, now walking with such ease, with such purpose. Mahogany couldn't help but smile as she watched him, knowing that their journey had brought them both to a place of peace and contentment. As they continued their walk, Mahogany spotted a bench under a large oak tree. She gestured for Kyler to sit next to her, and they both took a moment to rest. The park was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Mahogany leaned back against the bench, breathing in the fresh air, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at ease. She glanced down at Kyler, who had settled at her feet, his head resting on her lap as he gazed up at her with those soulful eyes. In that moment, Mahogany realized something profound. Kyler had come into her life not just as a dog, but as a teacher. He had taught her patience, he had taught her to be present, and most importantly, he had taught her to love without condition. The peacefulness of the moment filled her with a sense of gratitude. She realized that no matter where life took her, no matter the challenges she would face, she would always have this bond with Kyler. It was a love that could withstand the trials of time, a love that would only grow stronger as the years passed. As the evening grew darker and the stars began to twinkle above, Mahogany stood up, helping Kyler to his feet as well. They made their way back home, the soft light from the street lamps casting a warm glow on the path ahead. Kyler walked beside her, his tail wagging gently as they made their way home. That night, as Mahogany prepared for bed, she reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about how far Kyler had come, how far she had come, and how much they had both grown together. She realized that, in rescuing him, she hadn't just saved a dog, she had saved herself. Kyler had shown her that love could heal, that kindness could transform, and that even the smallest act of compassion could change the course of someone's life. As she drifted off to sleep, Mahogany felt a deep sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but with Kyler by her side, she knew she was ready for whatever lay ahead. They were a team now, an unbreakable bond forged through love, trust, and the shared journey of healing. As the days rolled into weeks, Mahogany found herself reflecting on how much Kyler had truly changed her life. She marveled at how he had gone from a stray dog, wandering the streets, searching for a morsel of food, to a well-loved member of her family. But it wasn't just Kyler's transformation that struck her. It was her own. Before Kyler, Mahogany had been content with her solitary life, her routine, her safe little world. She had always kept a distance from people, afraid of being hurt again. But Kyler, with his boundless affection and unwavering trust, had shown her that love, real love, wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, to open up to. He had taught her the beauty of vulnerability. Through him, she had learned that loving with all her heart meant allowing herself to be fully seen, flaws and all. One afternoon, Mahogany was sitting in her living room, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, when a thought crossed her mind. She had never really given Kyler the opportunity to show his loyalty. While he had made incredible strides in learning to trust her, she wanted to do something more, to give him the chance to show her just how much he cared, just how deeply their bond ran. Suddenly, an idea popped into her head. She had heard about a local park that was known for its sprawling trails, perfect for long walks and exploration. She decided it would be the perfect place to take Kyler, an adventure where they could both be free, where they could discover new things together. The next day, Mahogany packed a picnic basket with sandwiches, fruit, and some dog treats for Kaylor. She grabbed a blanket and their favorite toys and set off for the park, excited for the adventure that lay ahead. Kaylor, sensing the excitement in the air, wagged his tail furiously as he bounded around her, his energy infectious. When they arrived at the park, Mahogany was amazed by the beauty that surrounded them. The tall trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sun filtered through the leaves in golden beams. The scent of pine and fresh grass filled the air, and Mahogany couldn't help but breathe in deeply, feeling a sense of tranquility wash over her. She could sense that Kaylor was equally enchanted by the surroundings. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he sniffed the ground, exploring every corner of the park. For the first time in a while, Mahogany felt a rush of freedom, the kind of joy that only comes from being surrounded by nature and sharing it with someone special. As they made their way to a secluded part of the park, Mahogany spread out the blanket and set up their picnic. Kaylor sat by her side, eagerly waiting for his treat. Mahogany handed him a dog biscuit, laughing as he took it from her hand, his tail wagging rapidly. Watching him enjoy his snack brought a smile to her face, but it was more than just the moment. It was the realization that their journey had been full of little moments like this, shared experiences, simple pleasures that had woven them together into an inseparable team. After lunch, Mahogany grabbed Kaylor's favorite ball and threw it into the open field. Kaylor took off like a rocket, his legs a blur as he chased after the ball with determination. He was fast, faster than Mahogany had ever seen him run. She cheered him on, laughing as he returned the ball to her with an excited bark. They played for hours, Kaylor running around joyfully and Mahogany reveling in the pure joy of the moment. In that beautiful sun-dappled park, Mahogany couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had found something she didn't know she was searching for: a friend, a companion, and a love that transcended words. Kaylor wasn't just a dog. He was a part of her heart, her family, and her life, in a way she had never experienced before. The bond they shared was unspoken, but undeniable. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Mahogany and Kaylor sat together on the blanket, watching the world around them. She leaned back, Kaylor's head resting on her lap, and for a moment, everything felt right. The world was at peace, and she was exactly where she needed to be. The adventure that had started with a simple idea had blossomed into something much more. It had shown Mahogany just how far they had come, how much Kaylor had grown, and how much she had grown with him. She had seen him evolve from a stray dog on the streets to a joyful, loving companion who would stand by her side through thick and thin. And in that same time, Mahogany had evolved as well, learning the true meaning of love, trust, and the beauty of companionship. As they packed up their things and headed home, Mahogany couldn't help but reflect on the journey they had taken together. She was filled with a deep sense of peace, knowing that their love would only continue to grow, no matter what challenges the future might hold. They had built something beautiful together, and nothing at all could ever break that bond. With Kaylor by her side, Mahogany knew that whatever came next would be an adventure worth taking. Their story, their bond, was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Mahogany's heart continued to open in ways she had never imagined. Kaylor, her loyal companion, was no longer just the stray dog she had taken in that fateful night. He had become her anchor, her constant in a world that often felt chaotic. The bond between them had blossomed into something so pure and unbreakable that Mahogany often found herself marveling at how far they had come together. One particularly cold evening after a long day of work, Mahogany arrived home to find Kaylor waiting at the door, his eyes sparkling with excitement. She couldn't help but smile as she knelt down to greet him, feeling his warmth as he nuzzled into her arms. His presence, his unconditional love, had a way of soothing her like nothing else could. "Hey boy," she whispered, rubbing his ears as he wagged his tail furiously. "How was your day?" In response, Kaylor jumped up, his paws landing softly on Mahogany's chest as if to say, "It was better because you're here now." She laughed, picking him up and carrying him to the living room, where she set him down on the couch beside her. As she sank into the couch, exhausted from the demands of her day, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over her. It was moments like these that reminded her just how much Kaylor had become a part of her life. He was no longer just a dog. He was her family, her confidant, and her best friend. With every wag of his tail, every bark of joy, Kaylor showed Mahogany how deeply he cared for her, how much he had come to depend on her, and how their bond had become the foundation of both their lives. As the evening wore on, Mahogany found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had shared. There had been so many challenges, so many moments when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she was truly capable of giving Kaylor the life he deserved. But every time she looked into his eyes, she was reminded that love wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. It was about being there for someone, no matter the circumstances, no matter how imperfectly you showed up. Mahogany had never realized how much she had longed for something deeper, something more meaningful in her life. She had always been the kind of person who kept to herself, who didn't ask for help, who believed that she had to do everything on her own. But Kaylor had shattered that illusion. He had shown her that love wasn't about doing everything right. It was about showing up, about being vulnerable, and about being willing to accept love in return. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Kaylor resting his head on her lap, Mahogany's phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother, inviting her to come visit for the weekend. The message brought a rush of conflicting emotions. Mahogany hadn't seen her mother in a while, and while she missed her, there was a part of her that felt hesitant. Kaylor had become her world. The thought of leaving him behind, even for just a couple of days, made her feel uneasy. She knew that Kaylor had become so attached to her, so reliant on her presence, that she worried about how he would cope without her. But as she looked down at him, his brown eyes staring up at her with trust and affection, she realized something. Kaylor wasn't just reliant on her for survival. He had become a reflection of her own need for connection. He was her constant reminder that life was meant to be shared, that love wasn't about ownership, but about mutual care and respect. With a deep breath, Mahogany made her decision. She would go visit her mother, and Kaylor would come with her. The thought of taking him on a new adventure filled her with excitement. She realized that they had both grown so much together, that it was time for them to continue their journey together. The next morning, Mahogany packed up her things and made preparations to leave. Kaylor watched her closely, his head tilted to the side as if trying to understand what was happening. She knelt down to his level, cupping his face in her hands. "We're going to visit Grandma, buddy," she said softly, a smile on her lips. "Are you ready for an adventure?" Kaylor's tail wagged furiously, his eyes sparkling with excitement. He was ready, just as he always had been. Mahogany laughed, knowing that no matter where life took them, Kaylor would always be right by her side, ready to face whatever came next. As they drove toward her mother's house, Mahogany reflected on the incredible changes in both her life and Kaylor's. They had come so far from the first moment they met, two lost souls who had found each other in a world that often felt too big and too lonely. Now, they were a team, two halves of a whole, navigating the twists and turns of life with love, loyalty, and the quiet understanding that they were in this together. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more adventures, more moments of doubt and fear. But Mahogany knew one thing for sure. With Kaylor by her side, she was never truly alone. They had each other, and that was enough. As Mahogany and Kaylor continued their journey together, life seemed to unfold in the most unexpected of ways. What started as a simple decision to visit her mother had blossomed into a weekend that neither of them would ever forget. The drive was peaceful, the quiet hum of the engine in the background as Mahogany stole glances at Kaylor, who sat contentedly in the passenger seat, his eyes bright with curiosity. It was in moments like these that Mahogany felt the full weight of how much her life had changed since Kaylor had walked into it. She had gone from being a solitary, independent person to someone who cherished the simple act of sharing her world with a creature who didn't ask for much, just love, attention, and companionship. Arriving at her mother's house, Mahogany felt a wave of nostalgia. The house had always been a place of comfort, filled with the smells of her mother's cooking and the sound of soft conversations. But this time, things felt different. As she opened the door and stepped inside, the warm embrace of her mother was as comforting as always. But it wasn't just the familiarity that made Mahogany feel at home. It was the fact that she was no longer carrying the weight of her loneliness. Kaler, with his infectious energy and heartwarming presence, had become a bridge between her past and her future. He had filled the gaps in her life she hadn't even realized were there. And now she was ready to share this newfound connection with her family. Kaler was just as excited as Mahogany, bounding into the living room with his usual exuberance. Her mother, who had always been skeptical of Mahogany's deep affection for animals, was taken aback by how well Kaler behaved. His excitement was tempered by his gentle demeanor, and he quickly settled into the cozy space as if he had always been a part of it. Mahogany's mother, still surprised by the calmness of the dog, couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, I'll be," she said with a smile. "Looks like he's a keeper." As the day wore on, Mahogany's mother and Kaler found themselves forming their own bond. There was something incredibly sweet about watching her mother's initial hesitation turn into warmth as she slowly but surely warmed up to Kaler's gentle affection. Mahogany couldn't help but marvel at the transformation happening right in front of her eyes. It was as though Kaler had this magic ability to heal the gaps in people's hearts, even without trying. Later in the afternoon, Mahogany and Kaler ventured out into the backyard, where the sunlight bathed everything in a golden hue. As they walked together, Mahogany felt a deep sense of gratitude for the way her life had unfolded. Kaler, once a stray with nothing but the streets to call home, had come into her life and transformed it in ways she couldn't have imagined. He had helped her open up to love, to trust, and to share her life in ways she had always kept at arm's length. The two of them paused at the edge of the yard, Kaler sniffing the air as he always did when something caught his attention. Mahogany chuckled as he trotted off toward the far corner of the yard, following the scent of something intriguing. She followed him at a leisurely pace, enjoying the tranquility of the moment. But just as she reached the corner, something unusual happened. Kaler, usually so confident, froze in his tracks. His ears perked up and his body tensed. Mahogany's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't typical for Kaler to be startled by anything. She quickly called his name, but Kaler didn't budge. Instead, he began to bark, his body vibrating with energy, his eyes locked onto something in the distance. Mahogany followed his gaze, and to her surprise, she saw a small, scared puppy huddled under a tree in the corner of the yard. It was shaking, its tiny body trembling in fear. Mahogany's heart immediately went out to the little creature. She knelt down, speaking softly to the puppy, trying to coax it out from under the tree. To her astonishment, Kaler, who had always been the protective one, stepped aside and let Mahogany approach. It was as though he understood what needed to be done. He, too, had once been a stray, alone and fearful. And now, in this moment, he wasn't just protecting Mahogany, he was showing her what true compassion looked like. He wasn't the only one who had found a family. This scared puppy needed someone to trust, someone to show it the same love that Kaler had been given. Mahogany carefully reached out to the trembling puppy, her heart swelling as she gently cradled it in her arms. Kaler watched patiently, his eyes filled with understanding. This wasn't just a moment of rescue, it was a moment of giving, a chance to extend the love that had been shown to him. Kaler had taught Mahogany that love wasn't limited. It could be shared, expanded, and given freely to those who needed it the most. As Mahogany held the tiny puppy, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of peace. Kaler had not only transformed her life, but he was now showing her how to pay that transformation forward. The bond they shared was something powerful, something that transcended words. It was a love that spread beyond just the two of them. It was a love that had the potential to change the world, one heart at a time. "Thank you, Kaler," Mahogany whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me what real love is." Kaler, ever the loyal companion, stood by her side, tail wagging softly. The little puppy, now comforted by Mahogany's touch, began to relax, and the tension in its tiny body slowly faded. Mahogany knew that this was just the beginning, that her journey with Kaler had led her to this moment of kindness, and in turn, they would share this gift with the world around them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Mahogany looked at the little puppy nestled comfortably in her arms and then back to Kyler, who had patiently remained by her side the entire time. There was something in the air, something intangible yet powerful, as if the world had paused just for a moment to allow her to soak in the beauty of what had transpired. The puppy, once so fearful, was now quietly resting in her arms, its tiny body warming against hers. Kyler, ever the protector, stood guard nearby, watching over them both with his usual calm demeanor. The transformation in the air was undeniable. What started as an ordinary weekend had become something extraordinary. It was a weekend of love, of unexpected kindness, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest joys come from the most unexpected places. Mahogany's heart swelled with emotion as she reflected on the incredible journey she had taken with Kyler by her side. Just a few short months ago, she had been uncertain, unsure of what the future would hold. Her life had been full of questions and unknowns, but now, with Kyler's unwavering love and loyalty, she felt a deep sense of certainty. She had found her place in the world, and that place was filled with love. Kyler had helped her open up to the possibility of something bigger, something more meaningful, and now that bond had extended to a tiny puppy who, like Kyler, would grow up with the love and care they both deserved. Kyler's presence had filled a void in Mahogany's life that she hadn't even realized existed. His unconditional love had shown her that the power of love isn't something that can be measured or contained. It's a force that expands, that multiplies, and that grows stronger the more it's shared. In this moment, Mahogany realized that Kyler hadn't just changed her life, he had changed the way she saw the world. He had shown her that kindness was not just an act, it was a way of being, a way of living with an open heart, ready to offer compassion to those who need it most. Looking down at the tiny puppy in her arms, Mahogany felt a surge of emotion. This was no longer just a rescue mission, it was a call to action, a reminder that kindness and love could change the world one small act at a time. She couldn't help but wonder how many other lives she could touch if she continued to embrace the lessons Kyler had taught her. How many more creatures, human and animal alike, could find their way to the love and safety they needed, simply because she had chosen to share what she had been given. The puppy, now more at ease in Mahogany's arms, began to nuzzle her hand, seeking affection. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with the realization that Kyler's love had created a ripple effect, one that was now spreading to another innocent soul. Mahogany knew, deep down, that this tiny act of kindness, the decision to take in a frightened puppy and show it the love it so desperately needed, was a reflection of the greater journey she was on. As the day turned to night, Mahogany felt a sense of peace settle over her. The world seemed a little softer, a little kinder, and she was grateful. Kyler, once a stray with no family, had become the heart of her world, and now, together, they were creating a family of their own. Mahogany, Kyler, and the tiny puppy, all bound by love, compassion, and the unspoken promise to never leave each other's side. With the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky above, Mahogany whispered to Kyler and the puppy, "This is just the beginning, isn't it? There's so much more love to give." Kyler responded with a contented wag of his tail, his eyes bright with that unshakable loyalty that had become a cornerstone of their relationship. As they sat together, the soft evening breeze brushing their faces, Mahogany realized that the greatest lesson Kyler had taught her wasn't just about rescue or survival. It was about living with an open heart, ready to embrace the world's beauty, its challenges, and its unexpected joys with arms wide open. In that quiet moment, Mahogany made a vow to herself and to Kyler. They would continue to share their love with the world, spreading kindness and compassion wherever they went. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, their journey would inspire others to do the same.